Hello and welcome. My name is Margie Esteville, and I'll be the host for this TLC session. We're excited that you've joined us to hear this TLC session titled Best Practices for Supporting Military Students in the Classroom. Please welcome College of Health, Human Services, and Science lead faculty Claire DeCristofaro, MD, and Cole McFarren, manager of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending our session. And as you can see, there's the title of our talk, Best Practices for Supporting Military Students in the Classroom. And we'll talk about them from a standpoint of being military affiliated and not necessarily just a narrow definition of what a military student is. As you can see, there's Cole and my credentials and our place here at the university. I'm going to start off, and then Cole will take over, and then I'll go ahead and finish us off on this presentation. Neither Cole nor I can actually see the chat box while we're actually in the presentation mode. So we apologize if we look like we might be ignoring you, but we can't see the chat box and we can't respond to it. So please, if you do have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you at the end when we can pull the chat box up and we've stopped presenting. So what we're looking at is the idea of correlating online education and that format of educational delivery with the military student. As with most adult learners, this online format does allow them to continue their studies as they change duty stations, as their military obligations change. And this is not just, of course, the actual active duty military or the reservist, but also the veteran and also the families of military affiliated students. Flexibility is really, really important, maybe more so than for even our older student who's coming back to school, our older non-traditional student who does have all those obligations of family and work. My family is a former military family, and when my husband was activated from the reserves for mission operating Enduring Freedom a few years ago, we were minding our own business on a Friday afternoon. The phone call comes in, and the next day he was gone, and he was gone for 3 years. So I had young children, you have no warning. And so as a military family, it's not just the service members' service to our country, but it's also the family is also sacrificing. And no matter how much you prepare, there's just a limit to how much you actually can be ready for something that's such a major change in the family. So with the distance education, also obviously they can participate from all over the world. So one of the things that is important to us as faculty is that teaching and learning can be enhanced by being aware of the military culture and possibly, if at all possible, adapting that online educational experience to military students. And this does apply andragogical adult learning principles to your own specific discipline. So this can be cross-discipline. It does not only apply to one particular type of subject content. Now, we've had an all-volunteer military since 1973, and for many, many people, educational benefits are one of the incentives to sign up for military service. The GI Bill, which you'll hear people refer to, has a long history as legislation that's been enacted. You've got the Servicemen's Readjustment Act back in 1944, the post-9/11 GI Bill, the Active Duty Montgomery, Reserve and Guard Montgomery GI Bill, and also Voc Rehab and Education. In addition, if you have survivors of service members who die in the line of duty or dependents of totally disabled veterans, and you'll hear them referred to as service-connected vets, where they're receiving disability income due to an injury or an illness that is connected to their actual service, there actually also is tuition assistance available for them. So again, the family members do come in and are part of the cohort that we're thinking of when we say the military affiliated student. Now, there actually has been an initiative to identify what makes an institution military friendly. The Obama White House published this back in 2013. And again, the idea is that across the entire campus community, there's a culture of trust and connectedness. There's support from campus leadership. Also, the idea is that there will be a centralized campus effort for veterans as well as active duty and any military affiliated. And Cole is going to talk more about what we've actually done here at Ashford University to accomplish that. Some of it can also involve outreach. It doesn't necessarily have to just be university centered. So there can be collaboration with community organizations, governmental agencies, and to make sure that the necessary services that the veteran needs are going to be available to them. Tracking data is very important because sometimes the military student does need to be looked at as a separate cohort just to make sure that you are providing the type of environment which is going to support their success. Again, and this is some of what we're doing today right here in this presentation and all day on the military track, the idea of professional development for faculty and staff on these unique issues is very important. A lot of people may have a vague idea or think that they really understand, but unless you've really been in the trenches as a military family or as a service member or as somebody who's been teaching the military student, you may not have actually come across some of the issues that we'll talk about and some of the unique cultural aspects. So again, these systems do need to be in place. They need to be supported by leadership. And again, professional development would be part of the success of those initiatives. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over the next few slides to Cole McFarren. He's going to actually give us some information on some of the specifics that we've actually accomplished here at Ashford University.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Claire. And you know, when we sit here and have conversations like this, you know, about our military population, you know, until I really got more and more involved with this type of work, it's really kind of hard to fathom. You know, you see a bunch of military students in your classes, but to really be able to grasp, you know, just how many of our students there are, you know, is kind of hard, but we do keep track of a lot of those things. If I could go to the next slide, please, Claire. So really, you know, Ashford University specifically is very inclusive in their definition of, you know, our military population, you know, compared to some other places where you might see it. You know, it includes active duty service members, National Guard, reservists, absolutely spouses, dependents, and then Department of Defense and Department of Veteran Affairs employees as well. Next slide. And then you can see the total student population. You know, you can see over a quarter of our undergraduate students are serving in the military. Almost 10,000 of them, in fact. It's just a huge population. You know, our graduate students, a little bit less of the population, but still a very significant. You know, over an eighth of our graduate students. So over a quarter and over a quarter of our undergrad, and then over an eighth of our graduate students are military affiliated. Next slide, please. And then if we break it down, you know, by specific branches, we can see, you know, Air Force is the predominant one for our undergrad, with Army and close behind. And then Army is actually our most predominant one for graduate students. And we do still have a very significant both Marine, Navy, and even Coast Guard population as well. If we want to go ahead and break it down by college, we can see for undergraduate specifically, we have, you know, a majority actually of our military students are in the Forbes School of Business and Technology, with COLA, you know, second with 20%, College of Health 18%, and then College of Ed at 10%. And then if we take a look at our graduate students by college, we do still see a predominant amount of them in the Forbes School of Business, this time with a more predominant percentage in the College of Health and Human Services for our graduate students. Still a good amount in the College of Ed and some in COLA. So what, you know, kind of got me here, you know, to this point today, I was actually brought into our Military Veteran and Student Task Force Committee, you know, which takes in members of all different departments of the university and brings them together and have conversations like this specifically. So when I joined that group earlier this year, one of the things that we realized that you know, for as big of a student population as we have, and for as frontline as our faculty are, faculty were not represented as well as they could have been for that group. We had a couple of us that were faculty members that you know, spoke to that lens, but it was really kind of a gap that we recognized. So what we wanted to do was, you know, in August of this year, we actually formed a subcommittee made up of faculty, myself and Heather Albin, and Sarah Calvert, actually from the military side, and then a couple actually military academic advisors as well. So we have representatives from each college and a few other departments that we get together on a monthly basis to have these types of conversations. I'm very happy, you know, and honored to be able to lead some of those conversations with these folks and figure out where those knowledge gaps are. You know, what can we do to get word out, you know, better about best practices to faculty. So while this group is still very early on, next slide, please, we do have some things that we, you know, have recognized as gaps and things that we want to get out to faculty that are in the works, but we don't quite have to fruition yet. You know, number one being, how do we recognize those military students in our classrooms? You know, how do we get beyond that? You know, when you post your introduction, you say, oh, thank you so much for your service. that's great, but it's just a starting point. There's so much more that we can do. But it's such a nuanced, relationship. At the same time, you don't want to, call out your military students and say, hey, you need to be recognized. I want to get you out in the front of everybody, because that's not everybody's style either. It's a very self-disclosed, very unique kind of, circumstance for those students. So, and then another question we have, too, for faculty is, how do we keep track of those? What does it mean when, Claire tells me at the beginning of her class that, she's a military spouse? How do I keep track of that? And how might that inform, how I reach out to her, and, different things that I keep track? I know we all have probably spreadsheets and different notes that we keep track of, throughout class. So that's definitely something worth noting, however we do it. The notes section, in the grade book being another, best practice that we kind of realized was another good way to keep track of that as well. Next slide, please. And then coming soon, from some of the feedback that we heard from faculty, 99 times out of 100, when you're working with a student and they say that they're military, there's no reason to second guess them or question them, under any circumstances. However, there are, from time to time, just little strange situations where, maybe you feel like maybe you're not seeing the whole picture, or something might just seem a little bit off. So we're going to be having a process very soon that we're going to publicize with faculty, to where if something weird does come up and they want to just be able to double check and verify a student's military status, we will be able to provide that information for you. And then lastly, one of our big hopes and hopes by the end of this year would be to get a nice big CETL SharePoint page with all things military facing for our faculty specifically. We want to be able to have we have a great policies and procedures manual that talks exactly about these things. It's huge and it has tons of great resources. But being able to get all of those in one nice, neat space for faculty is one of the goals that we have, and keeping that up to date. So that's another takeaway that we have, that we're really hoping to get something to fruition by the end of this year. So I'm very, very happy and proud and honored to be able to work with this group and this population of students, and to be able to get the word out to faculty. So, but it's still very early on in some of those conversations. Some of those conversations have been going on for a very long time, but some of those we're just getting faculty more and more involved, which I'm very, very happy to do. So looking forward to more work with that, and we'll definitely get word out as we make more and more progress. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Cole. I'm going to actually be touching on some of the things that Cole just mentioned as well when I'm talking with the rest of our presentation. One of the things to think about is, again, and Cole mentioned this, at least in the undergraduate, 1 in 4 students are military affiliated. So the thing is that you definitely, if you're teaching any class, you can expect to have someone in the classroom who's got some military affiliation. Now, we are going to discuss whether or not they actually do disclose this to you. In many cases, they may not, or they may disclose it to you later on. So I'm going to discuss a little bit of how that might occur as you go through your trajectory of your 5 or 6 weeks of your classroom experience. And again, I've got the words best practices there. I've had faculty tell me that if they hear the phrase best practices anymore, they're just going to run away and emigrate to a foreign country. But on the other hand, I like to strive to be evidence-based. So in my world of best practices, if someone says, it's a best practice, I actually say, really, do you have some data to support that? And very often they don't. They went to a conference, or somebody told them something, or it's just their own gut feeling or their intuition. So I really do try to show you here, I hope in today's presentation, that we are looking at some evidence-based ideas upon which to base our activities, our teaching behaviors. Now, again, we're talking about military affiliation, and I'm using that phrase to bring us into the idea of the context of a large category. So we're trying to be very inclusive. There's been some sort of military lifestyle connection, whether it's current or whether it's in the past. And you might say, well, really, why honestly does a past military connection make a bit of difference? And it really is a huge impact on someone's life, and they carry that through with them for many, many years, possibly their entire life. And I've seen that in my own family, and I've seen that with the veterans in my family. My husband, who's a physician assistant, he continues to work with veterans who are disabled at our local VA hospital. So speaking the military language, I cannot tell you how often where he's able to really do a better job communicating with those veterans because he shares that language and he's been part of that culture and that lifestyle. Now, we talk about something as us being concerned about the military student. Well, it's also a two-way street. And it always should be in an environment where we're learning. There should both be things coming from us towards them and from them towards us. And so there is a wonderful positive impact on the classroom because of what the military affiliated students bring to the educational experience. They very often have global experience. They can speak from direct experience of their travel all over the world in many cases. They have been usually trained somewhat in leadership skills or have occupied leadership positions. And so again, they can contribute to the classroom with those skills and those stories from their anecdotes from the past. And essentially, it's like professional anecdotes, just like you'd have in any discipline, where somebody might say, yes, I work in the nursing home, and this is what we do with our elderly. This is our protocol. So those anecdotes are equally important, as you might also, as faculty, bring to your teaching when you bring your own professional anecdotes into the discussion. They've also had disciplinary methodologies inculcated into them, and a lot of that carries over. I'm always joking that, you know, the military people are always the ones who show up on time. They're almost never late because you're just not late in the military. So the idea of focus, the ability to work under pressure, these are things that they probably have gained from their military experience. So as we've already said, there may be various different types of affiliations. And yes, there may not have been a direct experience of the military lifestyle. For some of them, you still will see that some of their culture has probably been imbued into their nature and how they view the world and what their perspective is. So a lot of what you see in the literature on the military student is the idea of this transition, the military to academic transition. So this actually can be described from a theoretical standpoint from Schlossberg's theory of marginality and mattering. So feelings of mattering have been shown to be important to student success. And of course, we're all here about the outcome, which is student success. That idea of mattering allows someone to feel more connected to other people as well as to the institution itself. So the other people could be their classmates, it could be you as faculty, it could be any of the people with whom they interface at the institution, advisors and so forth. Now, there actually can be a change that is going to occur when this transitioning happens. During service, you have a purpose and a meaning. You've got a mission. Like I said, when my husband got his phone call, the first words were, "We have a mission." And I actually was there when the phone call came in, and I didn't even understand honestly what that meant. What do you mean we have a mission? But those words meant everything. That meant your whole world now changes. You're totally focused on that mission. That is the priority of your life. And also the cohesiveness of the unit may be a life and death thing. So when someone says turn right, everybody has to turn right because it might be life and death. This doesn't mean there's not room for individuality or critical thinking, but sometimes you just have to turn right when you're told to. So the impact of job performance is also very clear. You're given very clearly identified goals. And if you follow through and you meet those goals, you know whether you've done it or not. Sometimes in academia, that's not necessarily the case. So the student veteran especially might feel marginalized because they don't feel that they matter and they don't feel as connected. They also may not have a lot of knowledge about our post-secondary education system. So this idea of the transition phase, requiring a little bit more support, is actually something that's been known for many, many, many years, but we really sometimes don't actively and consciously embrace this in our teaching behaviors or in the way we set up our educational experiences. Now, that business about self-disclosure, again, sometimes they self-disclose early in the class, like right on an introductions board or somewhere else. Sometimes they do not. They do not feel as though they want the military affiliation to define them, and that's fine. However, as you progress through the class, as you study different topics and your subject content and your discipline, it may be obvious to the student that they should disclose and bring some of those experiences into the discussion. So again, be aware that it may not happen early, it may happen later, or not at all. Also, as Cole mentioned, we are looking for ways to hopefully confirm this self-disclosure. But right now, what you can use is Civitas. If you go into Civitas, as you know, you can see the advisor that is attached to each student. And so if you have to query that advisor, that is one way if you feel the need to do so. When we think again about the transitioning, then it must sound, as I've described it, as a culture shock. So yes, it is actually the idea of transitioning from one culture to another. So again, military is more team-centric rather than individual. Again, the idea is that the goals of the team become and the mission become paramount. Probably you're going to be expected to adhere to rigid timelines, and it's going to be very regimented. And there will be leadership oversight, and the expectation of continuous learning and training and improvement is always there. Every 6 months or so, they're going to have, for instance, ceremonies on the most improved and the person who did the best in the physical activity training and so on. So this is something that everyone's keeping in mind, is who is moving along that path towards the goals that are expected of both the individual as well as the unit as a whole. However, in the academic culture, some of that is there, but as you know, it's very different in many other regards. So the idea is we're asking people to be more focused on critical thinking, being more individual-centric and developing their own mind. So that involves asking questions and challenging the status quo. Plus, instead of a lot of the learning necessarily taking place under direct leadership with very, very clearly defined training protocols, a lot of the learning is taking place outside the classroom. You're having reading assignments, and you're having other types of learning activities designed for individual students, and rarely does it involve the entire class as a whole, if ever. Even collaborative work usually only involves maybe a few students that have been assigned to a group. So that idea of unit cohesiveness and clearly defined goals that everyone is going to be engaged with and following is not necessarily there. So therefore, when we think about the student, and we think about the type of student that we're dealing with, we're looking at both challenges and opportunities for instructors. So being a focus on faculty, think about what types of characteristics for the student veteran are going to probably be the case. And of course, this is not true of every single student veteran, but in general, they're going to be older. They will have had real-world work experience. Even if that work experience was simply in the military and not in civilian life, they now have real-world work experience. I have many, many students who bring those in all the time to their discussions. I had an Air Force mechanic who kept talking about the importance of following a specific checklist, for instance, so that when the plane left the ground, it was safe for everybody on the plane. And for him, this was something that he'd never done before in his life. And we were talking about something to do with brain development. I teach some of the neuroscience courses in psychology. And so he was actually very excited to see that what he'd actually done was probably had an increased interconnectedness in certain areas of his brain that were required for that task. And he was able to connect it to our subject content that way. If you're talking to someone who's got a military affiliation, you'll often hear them just casually say, "Oh, what's your MOS?" So that's the Military Occupational Specialty Code. And so an MOS could be something medical, it could be like a mechanic, it could be a sharpshooter, whatever it happens to be. Most people who've been in the military a while will actually know the MOSs. They'll actually have a pretty good knowledge of what the different ones are, and they automatically know what that person's training was, what the expectation of their job duties is, and what their place is in the unit and in the overall system. So they are very motivated very often for career advancement. So this is a very good thing for us. That motivation is often already there. We're not necessarily having to supply that motivation. And again, as I mentioned earlier, because of the military service, there is a certain increase for most veterans in maturity, responsibility, and accountability. Let's see if I can get this to advance. There we go. Okay, so here's a little bit more on the student veteran. So those were some of the very positive things, but there are also some challenges, and here are the challenges that have been identified. Veterans may underestimate the rigors of academic life. You know, it depends on what they've heard or what they might or might not know about academia. And again, they're coming from a very rigorous background and expectations in the military world, and they may think that nothing else could possibly be as rigorous. But you know, as I've often said, no matter what job you're doing, it all has its own important special areas of knowledge and learning and skills, and this is no exception. So sometimes they can trip up, especially at the beginning of their academic path, not realizing what is expected of them. There may also be disabilities. Now, these may be combat related, and unfortunately, some of them are invisible. So it's not necessarily something you're going to be able to see right away. I myself have had many, many individuals in the classroom who are service-connected veterans. They have a traumatic brain injury because they've had injuries, IEDs exploding, and so on. They will describe it in excruciating detail if it happens to come up. I happen to get a lot of self-disclosure. In one of my courses, because we have an entire week where we talk about traumatic brain injury. So again, post-traumatic stress disorder, TBI, sexual trauma, there may also be sensory and motor impairment. So they may have to be using assistive devices just to complete their schoolwork, which also just takes longer. It takes more time and it's more difficult. There may be more family and work concerns. They may be the first in their family to attend college. So again, that's that idea of transition and complete lack of knowledge about academia. And again, the sense of not being connected, that mattering idea. There's a culture shock because there's isolation and confusion. So these are things that have been identified in research on this population, on this subpopulation of students. So one of the things to think about when you're going into a classroom is, of course, we're always doing self-reflection, we're doing debriefing, trying to get better with each attempt at our teaching behaviors. So if we focus on the veteran or the military-affiliated student, think about what kind of images or emotions come to mind. When you yourself see someone in uniform, do you have a personal reaction? Are you tying it to some sort of experience or family experience? What about if you hear about a female veteran? So start to think about some of these questions to sort of think about how you are actually behaving in the classroom, and you may be doing things in an unconscious way, but by looking at the questions on these two slides, it will bring more of this to the forefront so that you can consciously approach this subpopulation of students. You yourself may also have a specific attitude or belief toward the military in general, or why you think people actually elect to serve. In our case, my husband didn't need, for instance, the educational benefits. He already had his career. He just had always wanted to serve. It was something he talked about all his life, and he finally felt that he had to do it over my strenuous objections because I had no inkling at all that he wanted to do that when I married him. So you can imagine the intense conversations we had. What opinions do you hold of war, of military conflicts, or those who have served in combat? A lot of people will confuse, you'll hear this phrase, that they confuse the war with the warrior. And so again, when you're in the military, whether you agree with the conflict, whether you agree with what you're doing or where you're being sent for whatever reason, you still have to go. That's what's part of the culture. So again, the war versus the warrior may be something that you're mixing up in your mind. And also you may have some concerns over how you might handle someone who has directly experienced combat. Again, as I mentioned, they may have disabilities. So are you comfortable with folks who have physical challenges? Might you be biased, or might you have difficulty dealing with someone who has some of these invisible disabilities where they're going to possibly have startle responses? They're having sleep problems because of nightmares. With traumatic brain injury, their response time is not as quick. Now, in the online environment, unless you're having a synchronous meeting, generally we're asynchronous, and that really is helpful for people with traumatic brain injury because it often takes them longer to complete a task. Now again, thinking about the resources that you have at your own university, can you contact the student advisor? Yes, to Civitas, and who are the military veteran resources at your university? So there's something that's called an activity that actually has a name called welcoming in. And welcoming in is the idea of identifying and then specifically welcoming the military affiliated student, recognizing obviously that they're unique individuals, but again, look for that self-disclosure, include possibly an announcement that would recognize their service and the possibility of special circumstances. So here's just a sample phrase or sentence that you might want to include, whether it's in an announcement or whether it's in a mass email to the class. So everybody in the class is getting this. You're not singling out individuals. Remember also that they are both sexes, not just the males, although most of the time we think of males as being the veterans. Now the thing is, special circumstances are possibly going to arise in terms of the duty stations being moved and the lack of internet access and so on. Now, some of the things that are considered quality best practices are, if you do have some personal opinions about military service or some of the recent military conflicts, don't actually express them from a teaching standpoint because they may perceive it as derogatory towards their service. They may themselves not have agreed with the military conflict. So just, it's best not to express those opinions. Recognize they may not want to discuss their experiences at all. Sometimes classmates will directly ask, have you killed somebody? What's combat like? Try to discourage these inquiries because these are really hot button areas that may make it very, very difficult for the military student. If you yourself have not experienced this lifestyle or combat, you probably have no idea of what it's like. And so help, this to not be a frustrating situation for the class in general. Again, if there is collaboration work in your class, again, the military student might have difficulty with that. And again, recognize that this does have value. This may be a newer type of collaboration. Explain to them they did collaborate as a unit when they all were working towards their mission, but essentially it's just a different way of collaborating, that it has value to them. Also to make sure that obviously the stigma of any disabilities is not applied to their learning experience. So as I said, you may hear them just casually say, I've got a TDA, or a TDT, or a TAD, or a TDI, or a TDY. So there's all those T's with D's. And basically what it means is that if you're active duty, you can get a temporary duty assignment that takes them away from their regular station. When they signed up for your course, they were at their regular station. They anticipated being there for the full period of time and being able to participate and meet all their obligations. But then again, the phone call comes, or their commander says it's time for you to go, and they don't know where they're going to be going. And that also not just applies to military who are active duty, but reserve and National Guard. They can be called up at any time. So remember that you can refer them to the Veterans Advisor. And you remember also another thing, if you have a veteran and they say, I can't be there on such and such a day, or I have to travel to have an appointment at the Veterans Administration Hospital, when you have an appointment at the VA for, let's say, a healthcare evaluation or a psychological evaluation, you have to show up, or you literally run the risk of losing your veterans benefits. So again, because they're absent doesn't mean that they just willy-nilly have gone and made an appointment. They often are just given that appointment, and you have to show up. It doesn't really matter what else you're doing. So that again can affect the family members as well. So an andragogical approach to teaching that would incorporate these best practices is to stress self-direction, motivation, experience, and the practical application of knowledge, which, as we know, we're doing for all of our adult learners. So thinking about how your course material can be relevant to their own lives is really important, as well as their experience and career plans. As I said, the military culture is much more structured. They're going to have things much more well-defined. So if at all possible, try to provide as much structure as you can, and also the expectations of how you can work with that student when the military duties may keep them away from the classroom, especially with internet blackouts. I've got one right now who's going somewhere for several days, and they'll be coming back. And I've advised them what I want them to prioritize and where I can have wiggle room. So wiggle room on quizzes that remain open through the course, wiggle room on assignments that you're able to grade at any time. But the things that are interactive, like a discussion board, I tell them to prioritize that, for instance. If you know that there might be an obstacle to being away, talk to them about that at the beginning, and also give timely feedback, because they, again, the idea of them being used to a leadership situation during their learning and their experience, they're looking to you for that leadership, and so try to possibly be in a little bit more communication than you might otherwise be. So we spoke very fast, Cole and I, because when we had developed this slide deck, we actually thought we might have a little bit more time to present it. So I'm sorry for us chattering on. But at this point, we also are giving you our emails if you'd like to reach us. And there is the references page for some of the things that were cited on the presentation. So now I can finally see my chat box. So if anybody, I don't know, Margie, if we can unmute everyone if they'd like to speak, and I'm going to try to scroll back to the chat box and see if there's any questions or comments. Okay, thank you, Bill. Hey.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying thank you, Bill, for your comment. Go right ahead. Who's speaking?
Yeah, I just want to tell you that, you know, through the years of my association at Ashford, you know, I've worked very closely with Molly Molnar, you know, when I was a instructional specialist, a faculty member, and I've encountered all kinds of military situations. And to me, if you just take the time to think it through like you provided us here, and understand that context, I think we really get some good outcomes, because I've had situations.
There's nothing there. There is nothing.
Yeah, I've had situations where, you know, students in the military would call me and say, they would say that, no, I have to fly a mission, or I have to do, do this or that. And I just made adjustments. And so I think the more we understand this bigger picture conceptually, I think we can improve the system and improve our quality of teaching for the military student. But nice job on this. Very nice.
Thank you for the kind comment. I think that, to me, of course, it's very important from my own personal experience, which is why I volunteered to be on the military committee in the first place. But, for all of us here at Ashford, especially, when you look at 1 in 4 students having a military affiliation, at that point, this has to be important to every single one of us who chooses to teach here. And, of course, in any institution, they're using the GI Bill to come back to school, and they're having another career when they get out of the armed forces. They're not ending it there. It's very rare that someone retires when they get out of the armed forces at 40 and stops working. So the thing is that we're all going to see them in institutions of higher education. Somebody was asking in the chat box also, I think it was Margie, saying that some students are doing all their classwork in one day. Yeah, that does happen. Now, in the military, education is really, really supported, and it's expected. You always hear the phrase, if you haven't gotten an education while you're in the military, it's nobody's fault but your own. Because if you want to go ahead and get any type of certification, educational training, whatever it is, the military often will really, really help you make it happen. So people have gotten everything from undergraduate to master's to doctoral degrees while in the military. And often there are tremendous modifications to their military obligations made to enable them to pursue those goals. However, sometimes there are things that are just going to happen. You're in that unit, you're in that mission. I was teaching at another school a few years ago, for instance, in the graduate nursing program for nurse practitioner training, a nurse practitioner degree. I had a student who thought he was going to be able to be completely devoted to school for his entire 3 years, and there it was, the entire summer he was pulled away. And we had to figure out how to make the course work for him, and we were able to. We just had to really pull out all the stops and make a lot of modifications, but he was able to stay on track and progress with his cohort to his planned graduation date. I just recommend that for faculty, yes, it could be that you only see them in the discussion board 1 day a week, and that's a real problem. What you can do is ask them to try to prioritize things that are interactive. The other thing I also try to tell our faculty here at Ashford is this: if you are telling them that there's wiggle room, for instance, on quizzes, make sure that your quizzes in your course are open the entire time. So maybe they don't take the week 1 quiz in week 1. Maybe they take it in week 2. That's okay, as long as they get it done before the end of the course is over. Assignments, again, I've been in a situation where I've gotten all the assignments literally in 1 week at the very end, because they could not get them to me earlier. The only thing I will tell you is one caveat is if you do something like that and you yourself personally as faculty have a grading deadline, then go ahead, put that 0 in the grade book and advise the student they're going to see a 0, the Sunday night grading deadline, and tell them that the minute you get that assignment and it gets graded, that grade will overwrite the 0, because they get very upset if they see the 0, and you don't want to just leave it blank. So it has to be done there. So again, you can really modify what is done in the classroom to support the students. You can decide for yourself what you feel is a priority, where you're willing to make adjustments and where you're not. And again, just think about some of the resources that are out there that we're trying to put, again, as Cole said, in one place where it'd be easy for us to reach out and take advantage of them. All right, well, with that said, thank you. I don't see any more comments or questions. I appreciate all of your attendance, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Claire DeCristofaro and Cole McFarren, for your presentation, and for all of you joining in this session today. So enjoy the rest of TLC. Toodaloo.